Good evening YouTube, this is Captain Machine here, back for another news beat. I must admit in the past I've had difficulty picking my topics, and today has been without exception. As such, I eventually decided to talk about the fact that in the British Armed Forces there has been a survey carried out which has indicated that the morale is not as fantastic as everyone would hope it to be, which is not hard to explain really when you look at the fact that the British Armed Forces fight on two fronts with an army a fraction of the size of the Americans or several other world leaders. I'm going to be putting a link in the sidebar to a BBC article which will explain all this. But I thought to myself, how can you use army morale in a game? Now, there are two ways of looking at army games, purely because, I'm going to just turn that off 1 second. There we go. Don't want to get too many beeping noises during the video. There are two ways of looking at an army game, because army games, well, games involving armies can run from the gambit from fantasy up to sci-fi, because in any period of time, in any setting, there's always an armed force, even if that armed force consists of a warlord with just a few warriors in a small warband, which would be typical for a Bronze Age or Stone Age game, if you went that far back, which I have done, and it's highly enjoyable. Or of course, if you go to modern day, which is a carbon copy of what is happening now, or even a futuristic game where war is done on a grand scale with epic battleships and massive titanic mechs and tanks and laser guns, and you get the idea. And you watch Star Wars for Christ's sakes, and you get the idea. Play MechWarrior, same thing. Of course, war does change throughout history, but we're not talking about war itself, we're talking about the morale of the armies involved. Now, like I say, there are two ways of looking at an army game. First is you are in the army, or you are interacting with the army because you're a third party. Now, the third party I'll do first because it's the easiest and the easiest to get out of the way. Third party is, generally speaking, in a game which would involve some elements of armed morale, may be that you've encountered a armed military force in the past, an army that is you're trying to go around or go through, or you've encountered. Consistently fighting and defeating what they send at you would lower the morale of the soldiers involved. A good example would be 300. Because wave after wave of these Persians were thrown at the Spartans, and with the exception of a couple of elite units who wanted to prove their worth, the majority of people depicted in the movie were unwilling to fight because the Spartans who were fighting had proved to be such effective warriors. So there is that to consider. The other point to consider is you're passing through a certain territory and you encounter deserters, and they would tell you all kinds of tales of woe and slaughter, and the reasons why they deserted, of course, are that everything they tell you will be tinted by their terrified state, obviously. And then, of course, there's the more direct approach where you may be hired as assassins or killers to eliminate either key officers in an army, or even the head of the army, even if you come back to a feudal system, even the king or the duke involved in the army, or the prince. But the main bulk of what I'm going to talk about today is what happens if you're playing a game where you're in an army, and how do you use morale. Now, first of all, this is the most important thing, I cannot stress this highly enough. You should never, ever, ever tell a player that his morale is broken. There are a couple of exceptions to this rule, things like being magically influenced, or having a psyker influence your mind, or being subjected to some kind of mind-controlling drug. I mean, those things are exceptions outside of the norm and are treated as such in the rules. And there are ways of allowing you to resist that, generally speaking, in a game, or cure yourself of it if you realise you have that problem, if the option, of course, is available to you. But with that obvious exception, you should never ever tell someone how they feel about any sort of situation. What you can do is you can tell them what everyone else is doing. Now, say for example your players are in a small regiment or unit, and that unit is heavily demoralised due to the fact they are losing a war, or the reason why they're fighting has become unclear, or they are they're leaderless, without supplies or provisions, and they're having to fight on spares and scraps and with sticks and stones basically. I mean, all those kind of different things would cause the morale to drop suddenly. Don't tell the players that their morale has dropped. Tell them what the other NPCs in that regiment are doing, how they are reacting to the events that are unfolding around them. Now, of course, the key point about this is that if you're going to run it off the principle that you're losing the war, there are going to be certain situations where you're going to have to engineer fights that the players can't win, and of course they have to retreat when they're told to or when it seems appropriate to do so. I mean, if you come up against something you have no hope of defeating, then the sensible approach is always to flee, although some players can be quite stubborn about that sort of thing, so you have to be careful with it. And you don't have to force them and tell them they have to flee. That's something they should decide to do themselves. Although, if generally speaking the person's to the left and they're to the right is running away, they may be more inclined to do so. I mean, how about in this particular scenario we're talking about here, have them overhear the whisperings of soldiers who are considered deserting their post, going back home, surrendering to the other side if the other side is, according to rumours, able to take them. Conscript armies would suffer from this greatly because, especially if the other side was trying to present itself as being benevolent, or actually was benevolent to them, they'd be more inclined to surrender to them, especially if their officers had been killed recently or they were not around. Because in conscript army, generally speaking, unless they've got this national frenzy of pride in them, they wouldn't want to fight for any long period of time, especially if they were losing battle after battle or just losing men. You could be winning the campaign, but the fact that all your friends are dead would be a massive issue for you. So what you can do is you can tell the players how all the other NPCs react and see how they react. I mean, they may want to desert with them. That takes the campaign to a whole new direction. They may want to report the desertion to the officers and therefore brown nose with the officers and get a higher rank with that way. So yeah, something to really consider. Of course, the other angle, or the other side of this, is if you're in an army that has got a very good morale, they would always want to keep throwing themselves into the fight, which may be, in certain situations, contrary to what the group want to do, at which point they get dragged along. So it's interesting either way. I'll be talking about military more in the future because my friend wants to talk about military campaigns, which is something I'll talk about in the future. But for now, I'll leave you with this thought that in certain fantasy settings and certain sci-fi settings, you'll tend to find that certain regiments or units have this fanatical tendency to fight or die. Those are the two choices. Spartans from the movie 300 again is a very good example. Now, if we want to use real world examples, that particular vigour is very, very rare in armed forces and is usually reserved for elite units, because after all, if you're given the choice of dying or fighting, you get good at one or the other very quickly. So the majority of armed forces that a player should encounter, with a couple of exceptions like animated dead or mechanical constructs, should follow the same principles that if they are defeated they will break without having to slaughter them wholesale. Of course that option is available to you after you have defeated them, but it's not something you should have to do. Okay then, bye bye.